Today I do have the pleasure to introduce our speaker. Alan Four is Vice President for Public Affairs at Kinder Morgan. He has over 25 years of experience in law, government, and public affairs at the local, state, and national levels. For Kinder Morgan, he manages the corporate public affairs, government relations, and community relations activities for the existing company assets and major expansion projects throughout the United States. And he and I haven't had a chance to talk about this, so perhaps maybe afterwards, Alan. What most attracted me to be able to introduce Alan is that apparently Alan and I spent quite a bit of money at Valparaiso University. Alan for his own education, myself for my oldest son's education, and I have 2 more years to go. But Alan did graduate from the Valparaiso Law School. He also has been involved with a number of civic organizations of which you might have heard of, including Rotary, those other guys that start with a K that meet downtown. I shouldn't say that. The other guys who aren't smart enough to move here with us in the Metropolitan Club, Big Brother and Big Sister, the Boy Scouts of America, and the Presbyterian Church USA. Without further ado, let me introduce Alan and talk to you about.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I was not a Rotarian and a Kiwanian at the same time, however. Several years ago, when I was in law school, I actually was a Kiwanian. I was a charter member of the Valparaiso Sunrise Kiwanis Club. I believe they're still meeting. But as a Rotarian, I was a member of Rotary 1 Chicago, which is where I'm from and live. And that was probably 7, 8 years ago. I think I was a member of Rotary. So it's always good to speak to Rotary clubs. I know all the good work Rotarians do here in Ohio and across the country, and I commend you for that. What I want to do today is talk about a big issue for Ohio, which is energy and the development of the shale region, the economic impacts that has on the state, how our company is contributing to that, and also a lot of issues and challenges that are facing the industry today, more so across the country, but also in Ohio. And my job at the company, as was mentioned in the introduction, is I manage our public affairs efforts across the country. And we have assets in almost every state, as you can see on our map. We're the largest midstream infrastructure company in the country. And midstream basically means transportation and storage. So through 80,000 miles of pipelines, 150 storage terminals, a number of Jones Act tankers, we transport and store all types of energy across the country. I think our advancer is on here. Its slides are automatically advancing. So on that map too, just for reference, the colors represent different products. So we transport natural gas, refined products, that's gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. CO2, that's the light blue on there for enhanced oil recovery. And then a variety of about 2,000 different types of products we store at our facilities. In the state of Ohio, we've had assets here for over 60 years. Pipeline assets and terminal assets. Once the presentation is back, you'll be able to see those assets. We're also looking at, we're in the process of constructing a major project right now in Ohio called the Utopia Pipeline. It's about, I'll go to that, a $500 million project, basically traversing the entire state. This project is designed to transport ethane from the producing areas and the southeast part of the state through our existing pipeline system, through new and existing pipeline systems, ultimately transporting to Canada for the purpose of making plastics. So one of the good things about products coming out of the shale region, you obviously have natural gas, you have oil, petroleum products, but you also have byproducts. One of those is ethane, and not as common of a use or something that folks might think about, but think about plastics, right? How many plastics are in this room right as we're sitting here? So very important component of building plastics is ethane, and that's what this product is designed to do. So briefly, even though pipelines are prevalent all across the country, folks generally don't know what's involved with constructing a pipeline, or that pipelines are buried underground. There's the common misconception of the Alaskan pipeline with pipes snaking across the Arctic tundra. Well, pipelines are all buried underground, and this is the process that happens. A relatively simple process, as I mentioned before, we have a major project under construction in Ohio now. We've constructed pipeline projects here before. About 10 years ago, our Rockies Express pipeline. So our history here, I think, is pretty good. We've built pipeline projects before, and every state that you build a pipeline in is unique. But this process, from clearing the right-of-way at number 1 to restoring the right-of-way at number 21, is relatively the same. You have a trained workforce that knows how to build pipelines. We're working with organized labor in the state of Ohio, so we have experienced local folks building the pipeline. Your pipe is American-made. We have this pipe coming from Alabama, transported by train and by truck to the right-of-way. And you have processes in place through a variety of protocols and safety and otherwise to make sure that the pipeline is built safe. You deal with a lot of landowners, too, on pipelines, and I'll get into that in just a minute, but that's critically important in pipeline construction, is making sure that landowners, those who are directly impacted by pipeline construction, understand what you're doing, when you're doing it, how you're doing it, and why you're doing it. And we've had a very good success rate at that. So if you want to know what a pipeline looks like after it's finished in construction is finished and it's in service, that's what it looks like. And that's not a pipeline sticking out of the ground, that's simply a pipeline marker, meaning there's infrastructure under the ground. But if a pipeline is built properly, that's what above ground should look like from a pipeline. And you're right, that's agriculture, obviously. But you can grow crops right over the top of a pipeline right-of-way. So in that picture, roughly in the middle of that, is a 50-foot pipeline right-of-way with a pipeline underneath. So that's what pipelines look like once they're in service. So a lot of pipelines, right? 2.6 miles of pipeline across the country. It's much like a system of roads and bridges infrastructure, except it's all underground. These pipelines, you can see, carry all types of product, all places. And it's the major form of transporting energy. Let me go to this slide. So when you think about, well, how does all this get to where it's going? Well, almost all of the natural gas is transported through pipeline. Almost all of the natural gas liquids, that's what we talked about with the ethane, the project we're building now, and most of the petroleum products. So think about if you took pipelines out of the equation, how would we get our energy across the country? Well, we really couldn't. Trucks, boats, trains, they're part of it, but as you can see by these numbers, a small part of it. So where's it all coming from? Well, the Utica and Marcellus shale have really changed the plumbing of energy transportation across the country. Historically, product came from the Gulf area or the West, Alaska, or more recently the Bakken area in North Dakota. But the significance, the magnitude, the size, this map really shows, look how big the Marcellus and Utica shales are. It's a game changer. All the discussion over the years about domestic energy independence, really, this shale play is the icing on the cake on that. It really seals the deal of domestic energy independence because there is so much supply there to power what we need as a country and really help power the world into the future. So it's an amazing game changer in the industry, not just for energy development, but really energy security, because all the billions of dollars on a daily basis that we've been sending overseas to generally foreign governments that don't like us very much. Now, we like our biggest, you know what our biggest importer is? What country is the biggest where we import most of our energy from, where we still import? It's Canada. So we don't have a problem with Canada, last time I checked, but we don't necessarily like sending our money to Venezuela or Iraq or Iran or some of the other countries. And I know some of you in the audience still remember groups like the Arab League, remember? OPEC is still around, who could basically turn off the spigot and our economy would shudder. They can't do that anymore because we'll turn up our spigot if they turn theirs down. It's a game changer for the country. So Ohio specifically, this study just came out recently with Cleveland State and Youngstown State. $50 billion invested in the Utica shale development over the last several years. Amazing numbers. That's investments in the state of Ohio, $50 billion. Huge for jobs and economic developments, revitalize communities, growing economies locally. If you've been down to the shale region, particularly in the southeast part of the state, it's hard to get a hotel room in a lot of these communities. It's very, very busy, very, very active in communities. Some of the projects currently in various stages of development are there listed. Ours is at the bottom, the Utopia Pipeline. But look at that. That's really significant. That's a variety of transportation and pipeline projects. You can see the picture to the right where all of those are or proposed to be. So a lot of activity, a lot of investment in the state. Now, there's a big discussion about pipelines as well. And the midstream industry has generally been a quiet industry over the years. You haven't heard a lot about it. But the Keystone Pipeline, you remember Keystone? That became a big issue for national debate a few years ago. More recently, Dakota Access. You heard about the Dakota Access Pipeline. That attracted a lot of attention on both sides. So you've got folks in the industry talking about jobs and economic development, energy security, energy independence. Others talking about other issues related to how much is needed, leave it in the ground, eminent domain issues, fossil fuels, the whole debate about fossil fuels. So a very big part of the national debate, which is relatively new to us in the industry. We haven't been part of this debate before, but we are adapting to better understand the issues facing the industry. Ohio is not immune to that. These are some headlines regarding pipelines in the state on both sides of the issue. The issue of developing projects and how you develop them is critical, because we're doing one project in the state, several other companies are doing theirs. This isn't a vacuum, so we can do our project we believe to be the right way and in the best interest of the community, but if other companies aren't doing that or have issues, it reflects broadly. And when you've got 7 or 8 projects in various stages of development in the state, it's a big issue across the board. Some of the challenges that we're facing across the country have listed here. Regulatory ambiguity and uncertainty. While the federal government plays a major role in pipeline construction and development, it's not the only role. In fact, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that you've probably heard of, only regulates interstate natural gas pipelines. They don't regulate petroleum products pipelines, which is gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, oil. Only natural gas and only interstate. So the regulatory system for products pipelines is at a state level. So state by state is different. We were proposing to build a project in the southeast part of the country, and Georgia ended up passing a pipeline construction ban in their state. It's the only state in the history of the country that's actually banned pipeline construction. Think about that. Not California, New York, wherever else you might think that might happen, but in Georgia. So currently they still have that ban in place. They're going to end that ban, I believe, next month, but regulatory uncertainty is a big deal for companies. So when we're talking about investing hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, we've got about $13 billion of backlog on investment right now. We look at state regulatory systems as we do in Ohio. We've invested billions of dollars in Ohio over the last several years through our various projects and expansions. And even though Ohio, in the scheme of things, is relatively in its infancy, if you will, in the whole development of energy, if you compare it to Texas or Alaska or some of the other states, I think it's doing a pretty good job of balancing the interest of economic development, energy growth, and also environmental protection and property rights, all important issues. So I think Ohio, as a leader in this development across the country, is doing a pretty good job. So I compliment the Kasich administration, EPA, and other agencies for being part of that discussion. Also, local challenges. More and more municipalities and county governments are becoming involved in the siting of infrastructure or attempting to be involved. We had a project in Nashville where the city of Nashville passed ordinances related to the location of a compressor station. That's a facility designed to compress and move gas along the pipeline. That's a federally regulated piece, but the local government passed regulations regarding that. So there's the competing interest of the federal government and the local government in many cases. Eminent domain is a big issue. Property rights. Our project that we're building here in Ohio, we are not using eminent domain. So we have the entire project. We have about 800 landowners involved in that project. No eminent domain. Now, have we had issues? Have we had route adjustments? Have we had discussions about compensation, construction techniques? You bet we have. And we've been 2 years working on this, but we're not using eminent domain. So this is a big issue. We realize it. We're working with landowners. So every person that's going to be part of our project, our 200-mile project, has a mutually agreeable resolution with their property issues. If they said no, we moved around them. So there are ways to build these pipelines where eminent domain is not necessary or is used very rarely. And when we do have the authority, it's typically less than 2% of landowners that we can't meet accommodation with. This project, 0, but usually less than 2%. So we're recognizing that this is a big issue and needs to be taken seriously. Also, state challenges to federal authority. Or disagreements. For example, in New York, the federal government authorized this project called Constitution in 2014. It's still not under construction because New York is still in the review process of state permits. So even though it has federal authorization, the state hasn't authorized it. So states have a major role to play. And then finally, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is lacking a quorum, which means they can't approve major new projects. Now that, I think President Trump has nominated 2 of those commissioners so far. They should be approved relatively soon, so that piece should be cleared up. So what can companies do to address some of these challenges, and specifically to Ohio? And I want to talk about some of the things we've actually done to make sure that people, again, understand those key principles. What are you doing? How are you doing it? How's it going to affect my property? What's this going to look like under construction and when it's finished, and why are you doing it? So we worked to develop this, what's called an AIMA, Agricultural Impact Mitigation Agreement, on our previous project about 10 years ago. We were the first company to ever do this, and I compliment Dale Arnold there in the back with the Farm Bureau, because his agency, his organization, along with DNR, worked with us to develop this, which became a model for Indiana and Illinois to follow. Basically what it does, it offers extra level protection for landowners in prime agricultural areas. You got a lot of prime agricultural land in the state. So how deep we dig the pipe or put the pipe, soil segregation, drain tile, a big issue, soil compaction, all these issues of concern, crop yields, of concern to farmers, we put into a separate agreement, and that went over, I think, very well, and I think you talked to the Farm Bureau about that, pretty well received in the agricultural community across the state. We also are currently working with Ohio State University on crop yield. You saw pictures of the I think it was soybeans in the picture, but where we have a pipeline underneath, crops growing on top. Well, our information over the years is that there's no loss or relatively no loss in the yield of the crops, obviously very important to farmers. So we've partnered with Ohio State to do a detailed analysis on this project. Point being, if you're serious about providing transparency and information in the communities where you do business, do something like this. Partner with a university that's going to take an independent analysis look at this to make sure that what we believe to be true actually is true. I think that's very important for the industry. We also work with Kent State University on talking about the economic impacts. These pipelines, we're investing $500 million in this project in whole, but how does that impact and relate to local communities? So Kent State did this analysis and talked specifically about jobs and collateral benefits, taxes, et cetera. Again, something done locally at a respected institution in the state specific to this project. Not generalizations, but actual numbers specific to the state. Also, communication and making sure people understand and have available information about what you're doing. Our website, utopiapipeline.com, if you're ever having issues sleeping at night, please go to it. Download whatever you want. Tons of information about this project, where it is, how it's being built, when it's being built, photos, all the detailed information, that routing information, exactly where the pipeline is going. You can get at that website. We're very proud of that, and we want to be transparent, and that's the way that you do it, having publicly available information. Also making sure that the media understands what you're doing, because there's a lot of interest and a lot of coverage in the state, as we've mentioned. I usually think this is a no-brainer that you go out and educate the media outlets on it, but I will tell you, I've been to every major media outlet in the state that's on the routing of our 200-mile project, many more than once, and I repeatedly get from them, you're the first midstream company that's come to us and told us about your project. We're usually trying to track you guys down. That's a problem. And so if the industry has a concern, my industry has a concern about folks not understanding what we're doing, we need to do more of that and not just rely on third parties or emails from a Houston office about what's going on with your project. Go out and talk to people, and that's very important. Also to be good partners in communities. I love my championship steer from the Wayne County Fair. Look at that thing, isn't that great? But seriously, every county we are proposing to build this project, and we went to county commissioners and state legislators and others and said, what's important to you all? How can we be good corporate citizens and partners in the communities? And we're one of the first companies that have sponsored schools like Waynedale High School and actually participate in fairs and many other things. So finally, this is a big challenge for the country. It's a big issue for the country. There's a lot of fervor and debate out there about our energy future. So what we need to do a better job as an industry is in doing things like today, making sure you all have the latest information about what's happening out there and why we're doing what we're doing and what it all means. Good jobs, development of infrastructure, energy security, energy independence, the maintenance of existing assets, the 2.6 million miles of pipe, making sure people understand how those assets are built and managed and protected. I think when folks understand all of this and how it all fits together, they got a better understanding of why you're building pipelines and how pipelines and infrastructure and storage, how that plays into our overall economic security for the country. So here's the challenge. Besides the fact, what do you see? And I don't mean that we're missing part of Florida in there or a little bit of Texas, but you can look at this and see a couple of different things. You know, as I promoted it, you can see, well, pipelines play a big role in our energy transportation across the country. Look at that. That's our main source of transportation. Someone else could look at it and say, looks like you've got quite a bit already. Why do you need to build more? So understanding those two different viewpoints is critically important. And I'll close with this. I appreciate a group like this that is, business folks and community leaders and others, but I also have I did over 100 town hall meetings in the Northeast on one of our projects. Let me tell you something. You have not done a town hall meeting unless you've done town halls in New Hampshire, where you have, and I did this literally, I was at schools during the primary season. So I was there with our project team on a development of big project in New Hampshire. The next night, Donald Trump was in the area. or Jeb Bush, and one of the candidates. People take it very seriously, but we got a lot of spirited debate out there and a lot of tough questions, and that's important. So my point being is the industry needs to be out there more, talking about these issues and talking about what we're doing, and also listening to what other people have to say, because there are strong opinions and valid opinions about what we're doing. And as part of my job, I want to hear what that is. I want to listen to what folks have to say, because we can learn more as an industry and do our jobs better by being open to the communication and the very spirited dialogue that is out there, because we don't have all the answers. I think we provide a valuable service and a critical service, but can we do our job better? Absolutely, we always can. And we're welcome and open and interested in being part of this dialogue and part of this national discussion. So I appreciate your time and happy to answer questions if folks have them. You want me to call?
Yep.
Folks? Okay. Go ahead.
Do you have any idea how much money is spent on rail transport because Keystone was blocked, and what would be the implications if this pipeline in Ohio were blocked?
Well, not specifics on rail transportation, but a couple of things. Whenever you develop a project, you have to have a commercial certainty about it. So we looked at a project here in Ohio like this a few years back. The commercial certainty wasn't there, which basically means that you need to have an anchor shipper on your project. You have somebody that's going to justify the $500 million investment that we're making in this project. And that's without state incentives or any encouragement from the state of Ohio, let me add. So that's the first thing. So if you've got a committed shipper that's going to take up a significant amount of capacity on the line, that's a good thing. You're open to other shippers. It's an open access line, but you got to have that. Part of what you build into your planning process is also an understanding of the regulatory process. So if we weren't confident in the state of Ohio in the sense of, can we meet or exceed the regulations that the state has, we would have never built this project. And we look at certain states, and I can't say that about every state, where we're not going to build projects because there is a level of uncertainty. If a project like this isn't built for this particular project, you ever seen flaring at some facilities, flares going up? There are a variety of reasons for doing that, but one of the reasons is, for a project like this, ethane, if you don't have a way to get it into a pipe and get it to market, you're going to burn it off. What a waste of a commodity, right? So it's a good thing to get this in a pipe and get it to market. There are only certain ways to get product to certain places. Portland, Oregon, for example, is looking at a limit and a cap on how much storage can be in a particular city, in their particular city. Well, that's fine, but there's also a lot of folks who are driving cars there and have a need to fill up their cars. So they're and I think it's totally within their purview to be exploring things like this, as long as it takes into account everything else that's happening, because all of their supply is coming in by ship. There's no pipeline providing service. That's an issue for a lot of coastal areas. It only comes in by ship. California, for example, all the product coming in by ship. So there has to be a way to get it to market. It's a pretty simple process. It's coming from somewhere and it's going from somewhere. Trucks drive up to the truck racks at tanks and go to the gas stations. How does it get to the tanks? By one of those issues. So if one goes up, another one may level off. If one goes down, the other one would probably go up. So train traffic would increase, truck traffic would increase if pipelines were not in service or not able to be built. Yeah.
You talked about jobs.
Oh, okay.
How many jobs for Ohioans are created by this? I spend a lot of time in eastern Ohio, see a lot of Texas and Oklahoma trucks.
Yep. So asking how many Ohio-specific jobs are part of the project. As a barometer, it's typically about 50%, and that's across the country. Here, I think it's probably more like 75%, and here's why. Ohio has a trained pipeline construction workforce. For example, the laborers here in Ohio have a state-of-the-art training facility where they specifically train people on pipeline construction. The reason you see other states coming in, Texas and Louisiana and others, because they have that base, they have that core workforce Ohio already has it. So rather than bringing folks in from other places, you're going to see some of that for the specialized pieces, but Ohio has a very robust trained workforce. We signed an agreement with the laborers and the operators over 2 years ago to utilize primarily first Ohio workers. So when the job calls went out, the union locals got first crack at them. And if they couldn't fill all the jobs, the contractor filled from other folks. So Ohio gets first run, and that makes really Ohio, and credit to the laborers union in Ohio for training its workforce, gearing up and being prepared to go to work. Yeah.
A couple questions, and sort of piggybacking on his. Number one, what material is the pipeline made out of? Number two, are you buying that pipeline from manufacturing companies here in Ohio? And what is the impact of all this on manufacturing?
Sure. So the pipe is steel. It's a steel pipe, and we purchased the pipe from Alabama, where there was a mill that could actually handle the pipe that we needed in the timetable that we needed it in. And there's a big question now, too, across the country with all of the infrastructure being developed and all of these projects going on everywhere. And President Trump has put forth Buy American Steel. And I think there's a lot of value to that. The problem is that some of the steel mills are having trouble keeping up. And those that may have, including in Ohio, that may have been able to produce this type of pipe have retrofitted or have gone out of business. And to get those plants operating again is going to take some time. And a lot of these projects that are in development are on a very short timeline. Anybody who's in business knows you've got to meet a schedule, and you only have a short timeline to do that in. So we're doing our best to buy American pipe. We certainly did it on this project. But I hope what you're going to see is with all of this investment and the relative certainty about the investment, you're going to see more mills gearing up to handle the backload on pipe delivery that's out there right now. So I think it's a positive development across the board. Yes?
Would you address the vulnerability to terrorist activity in the pipeline?
Sure. Vulnerability to terrorist activity. So pipeline is just a general, a couple minutes on how pipelines operate. So our pipeline systems are 24/7 a day monitored. So if there is a incident on a pipeline, we have the ability to remotely shut down the system, segregate the system, turn it off, either repair the issue that we had, or in a form of redundancy go around that, much like an off-ramp, go into another system. So our pipeline system, because of all of the pipelines that are out there, doesn't have the same vulnerabilities that you might have in other forms of energy, because we can move the product in a lot of different ways, segregate the impact if we had on any particular area. Having said that, we work closely with the Department of Homeland Security and other law enforcement agencies to make sure our assets are protected, that the most current technologies are in place to address any issues that might come forward. And we're always improving and expanding upon those systems. We also monitor and patrol our systems from the air and from the ground to see if there are any impediments on our system at any time. But it's a big issue because we've talked about our entire energy system is based upon, from a transportation standpoint, on pipelines and the major amount of product that they carry. But because of that exact reason, why it's a big part of our energy transportation, there's a lot of ways to move it. So if, for example, our gasoline systems, gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, we provide jet fuel to Hartsfield International Airport, LAX, Reagan National, most of the military bases on the east. But there's another major system that does it well. So between these systems, if there's something that happens to one, another can pick up the load. And weather events can also be a big issue for the infrastructure, but you have contingencies for that. So I think we have a good, solid system in place of infrastructure from a pipeline standpoint and a storage standpoint to move energy where it needs to be and be prepared for any contingencies that may come along, weather or otherwise. Yes?
What's the average depth of your pipeline, and how do you electronically monitor pipeline integrity? How do you do that?
Right. So the depth of the pipeline and how do we monitor pipeline integrity? As the Farm Bureau knows, we adjust our depth in areas where we're constructing. So if we're constructing in prime agricultural areas, for example, we'll usually be a minimum of 4 feet, often deeper. The federal standard is a minimum of 3 feet. That's 3 feet from the top of the pipe to the top of the ground. But basically, you want to make sure your pipe is deep enough not to be impacted by something above ground. So if a farmer is tilling the area, you want to be low enough to avoid that. Also, it will be beneath other infrastructure that's out there. A lot of pipes out there. So if we're going to be out there, we're going to go beneath what is out there, usually a foot separation between whatever else might be out there. If that's drain tile, that's water pipes, that's gas pipes, whatever is out there. Roads, for example, will usually be 8, 9, 10 feet below those. If you're boring a road from each side, you're going to be about 10 feet from the road down beneath. Now, if we talk about water bodies, if we're going through a major river, the Ohio River, we may be 30, 40, 50, 90 feet below the bottom. We have been that far below the bottom of the river. And the way pipeline construction works too, you don't construct like this. I mean, you go down in a slope. My point being, so if you're approaching the border of a river, which is usually the most environmentally sensitive area, by the way, and culturally, you will begin a gradual slope several thousand feet back from there. So while you may be 4 here, as you get closer to the river, you may be 25 or 30 feet. That's called a horizontal directional drilling process. So that allows you to vary the depth, but minimum 3, 4. And then from an integrity standpoint, I mentioned before the monitoring systems that we have so that you can tell remotely from our control centers if there is any loss in pressure, any loss in product. That's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Remote shutdown, close the valve, segregate that part of the system. Yes, in the back.
Can you talk a little bit about the energy availability and the cost of energy that's given to, say, manufacturers, and how has that helped to lower costs for U.S. domestic manufacturers?
Sure. Talking about the cost of energy and how that's impacted industry and manufacturing. Well, I don't think any of you you can go to a gas pump and realize we've got pretty low gasoline prices, right? Your natural gas bills, pretty much lower, right? We don't control those bills, by the way. That's the utilities. Those are our customers. But they're pretty low, right? In fact, they're historically low. So that is a huge bonus to consumers, first of all, the public, but it's also a big deal for manufacturers and industry. No question that when someone is locating or expanding a business, the cost and availability of reliable and affordable energy is a critical part of whether they grow and expand that business. And now with Ohio especially, you are energy independent, really. When you always historically have been an energy importer, you're energy independent now, and you can get that product locally. That's been a huge benefit to businesses, manufacturing and otherwise, and we can see that in the foreseeable future. So the domestic energy renaissance it's in its infancy, but I think you're going to see more of this. It's leading to an American manufacturing renaissance because that reliable, affordable energy is just right there. Yes?
Okay. With all the fracking and some of the earthquakes that are happening, how do your pipelines stand up to that? What kind of entities do you have?
Sure. So asking about fracking, earthquakes, how do our pipelines stand up to that? I think from a broader perspective, if we construct in a fault zone or construct in an area next to a quarry, there are a whole host of issues that we've dealt with in where and how we build pipelines. So if you think about pipelines, don't think of a pipeline as a rigid piece. Because when we weld our pipelines together, they're probably 40, 50, 60-foot joints welded together. When you pick them up and the side boom puts them into the trench, the pipe actually bends. It's flexible. So it's not brittle and solid. It's flexible. So that allows us to have the pipe form to the topography of the land, or it allows it to move a little bit once it is in the ground, if there is a ground disturbance of some sort. So no pipeline is 100% proof if there's the big one. And everything is destroyed. But we have pipelines in San Francisco, we have pipelines all across the country, and they're built to withstand significant impact and significant earth movement. We're always looking at technological improvements like that, but just think of a pipe as being flexible and able to move, and it can generally move with the earth. Okay? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate the update on pipelines in Ohio. We look forward, I'm sure, if they have any other questions, they come up and see you after the meeting here. And with that, it appears we've survived the first meeting with me in charge here, so we'll go ahead and ring the bell and we can get out of here.